Phil Spector, he was a legendary figure.
A tragedy happened, but it could have happened in anybody's house. I had nothing to do with her death.
She was an actress, Lana Clarkson.
Lana never talked about suicide.
He went into studios and created magic. I needed to establish who he really is and what he's capable of.
Stop the camera from rolling for 1 second.
His troubles came in contact with our Lana.
Innocent until proven guilty.
Let history speak for itself.
That was the trailer for the new Showtime and Sky Documentaries docu-series, Spector. And this is Factual America. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. Each week I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. A chance encounter between charismatic actress Lana Clarkson and legendary music producer Phil Spector ended in a fatal shooting that forever warped his legacy. How could one of the most important figures in 20th century pop music also be a monster? The 4-part docu-series peels back the layers of one of Hollywood's most tragic crimes to paint a more human portrait of Lana Clarkson and the deeply disturbed man convicted of her murder. Join me as I discuss Lana Clarkson and Phil Spector with Emmy-nominated filmmakers Sheena Joyce and Don Argott, the directors of Spector. We assess the troubled legacy of one of the legends of the recording industry while celebrating the life of Lana Clarkson, one of the unsung heroes of Hollywood. Stay tuned. Sheena Joyce, Don Argott, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you?
Excellent. Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you on. We're talking about Spector, the new Showtime and Sky Documentaries docu-series. It's been on Showtime for a little while now, and it premiered last Sunday here in the UK on Sky. So welcome again, and it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Yeah, Sheena. So I mean, it may seem obvious given the title, but how we usually start things is ask our filmmakers, what is the film all about? So what is Spector all about? Maybe you can give us a bit of a synopsis for our listeners and viewers who haven't had a chance to see it yet.
Certainly. Spector is a 4-part documentary series where we re-examine the life and legacy of Phil Spector. I think we do it kind of through the lens of a post-Me Too movement, where we try and contextualize the events that led to the night of January 3rd, 2003, February 3rd, 2003, when Lana Clarkson was murdered in his Pyrenees Castle home. And we try very hard to make Lana Clarkson more than just a footnote in the Phil Spector story, and to kind of bring her out as a fully fleshed out human being.
Yeah. And I can't believe I'm asking this question, but I was talking to our producer here in this studio where I'm at, and he doesn't know who Phil Spector is. So there's a generation out there who doesn't know who Phil Spector is. Maybe you can, either one of you, Don, what might younger generations not know?
Well, I think, everything has to be contextualized given the time that it took place. And I think in the world that we live in now, where information is so readily available, I feel like people know less now than they did. Even though there's more access to information, I feel like the retention, frankly, like you said, I think Phil Spector is a great example of someone who had probably missed 2 generations already of people because they, of the time that he kind of came up. But, quickly, he was a, kind of a phenom, songwriter in the late 50s, really took to songwriting and the music of the day that was happening at the time with Elvis and, that kind of like singer-songwriter, emerging, business that was happening in the late 50s going into the early 60s before the Beatles kind of changed everything. But in that period of time in like 1957, 58, things were single driven, they were song driven, they weren't necessarily artist driven. And Phil came along and wrote a song called To Know Him Is to Love Him. And I think even though there might be generations of people that don't know who Phil Spector is, I would guarantee that because his music is so ubiquitous and being used in films and advertising, that they would probably know certain songs. But his first song was called "To Know Him Was to Love Is to Love Him," and it was like a very earnest, beautiful, like of that time period, a very melancholy, kind of longing, sad song. And I think he was 18 years old at the time, 17 or 18. He was, just graduated high school. So that became a huge hit, and in turn kind of launched Phil on this trajectory to be, he didn't really want to be somebody in the front, as the artist. He wanted to be the producer, kind of pulling the strings in the background, whether that was orchestrating, writing, or, bringing writers in to work with his new stable of artists, which were the Crystals, which is the Ronettes, so everybody knows, to Do Ron Ron, Be My Baby, You've Lost That Loving Feeling. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of the songs that this man was kind of behind and responsible for. So, and it wasn't until the Beatles came along in the early 60s that really reshaped the focus of things being producer driven and more band driven. And that kind of, in a way, kind of changed Phil's, trajectory of what he had to do to survive in this industry. And then ironically ended up, coming in to save and salvage the last Beatles record, which was Let It Be, in a legendary way that everybody kind of walked away and threw their hands up after everything was recorded. And Phil came in and kind of made sense of it all. So he's responsible for, Let It Be. So, he had a very prolific career, but really by 1980, and he worked with the Ramones, that was it. He was pretty much done. So from 1980 on, if you didn't know him, in the 70s or 80s, likely in the 90s and 2000s, you probably didn't hear too much about Phil Spector.
He was one of the first producers as stars, and he created a signature sound called the Wall of Sound, that he became known for. And it kind of didn't matter which artist it was that he was working with. It was this signature sound that was made famous.
Yeah. I think, well, thank you for that. I mean, I think anyone who's wants to know more, I'm sure you can Google these things and you'll find them. I mean, it's the Wall of, I mean, he was quite the innovator, right? And with this Wall of Sound and what he did, and there have been documentaries, not even specifically about him, but related to this, the Wrecking Crew, and we had a documentary on the show program called Streetlight Harmonies, which is all about doo-wop, and some of this, many people you interviewed are on there, and your exec producers, Jonathan and Simon Chin, have been on this program to talk about the Tina, and he what many might consider one of the greatest songs ever recorded, River Deep, Mountain High, and that's as we were talking before we started recording, that's a huge hit over here. And he had his in the UK, and he had his hands in on that. And the one thing I'm thinking of is in that doo-wop documentary, all of them say, well, things were going really well, and then the Beatles came across on that plane, and we knew that was the end, basically, for us. But Spector's actually on that plane. I mean,
yeah, Phil Spector's literally on the plane with the Beatles coming over. They were huge fans of the Crystals and the Ronettes, and that's how he started his relationship with them. So he was over on that flight and did kind of see the writing on the wall, I guess, somewhere over the Atlantic.
And as for someone who liked to be the center of attention, he's not anymore. Right. And as you say, he yet. I mean, that's the amazing thing. Not only did the last Beatles album, but then even does John Lennon's albums and Imagine and those
George Harrison as well.
That's right.
George Harrison, all these, Concert for Bangladesh, all that stuff. He's got his hand in on that. But even by then, he's starting to be a shadow of his former self. Now, but as you've already mentioned, and I think that's I've really thought was one of the things that was really excellent about this docuseries is that. There is another person who's inextricably linked with him now, and maybe we should talk a little bit. And you do, you give her I think it was very good. I mean, a lot of these things will say they do look at the victim and they do talk, but I do feel like it was as much as it should be, there was an equal attention to both parties, especially because of the damage that has been done to her reputation in the past. So maybe we can talk about who Lana Clarkson was.
Sure. Lana Clarkson was more than Phil Spector's victim.
Right.
She was a successful working actress. She was a daughter and a sister and a friend who, by all accounts, brought light and joy into the lives of everyone she met. She was labeled by the media at the time as B-movie actress Lana Clarkson. That moniker came in every headline, in every news piece, in every television story about her. And it kind of served to paint this narrative that she was somehow disposable or less than, on the wrong side of 40, looking for fame, desperate, and went home with this crazy man. At least here in the States, that was the impression that was given. So it was important for us to get to know the real Lana Clarkson from those who knew and loved her best, and to, as I said, make her more than a footnote in Phil's story. And what we found was that she was very successful as a working actress. If there's this feeling that if you're not a star or a millionaire, you're somehow a failure. But she had made her living as an actor her whole life.
She's in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I mean, that was like, these sort of things. I mean, it's like all these cultural touch points from the
yes, she was
the
the
80s
barbarian
and 90s.
Queen. I mean, she was in a ton of very
Roger
famous
Corman films. You got Roger Corman interviewed on this stuff.
And she was in a ton of TV shows. And, speaking of seeing the writing on the wall, as she approached 40, she knew that she wasn't going to be cast as the ingenue anymore, and was very clever and reinventing herself, and started to get into comedy and stand-up comedy, and started to book roles as more of a character actor. And in fact, she had this terrible accident that she broke both of her wrists and was sidelined for a long time. And so she took this job at the House of Blues to kind of get back into the world again. At the time, the Foundation Room was the place to be in Hollywood. It was a very hard to get into. The hottest of the hot people in LA would go there, and she cleverly got a job, working the list basically at the Foundation Room. That's how she came into contact with Phil Spector. But she was always thinking about next steps in her career, and like I said, on a personal level, was smart and funny and engaged, and was thinking of the future. She had gigs booked the next week. So it was important for us to kind of dispel this myth that she was this washed up B-movie actress, and really show her for the woman she was.
Yeah, and I think, and as what this film's also about is it's chance encounters, right? And
timing, as Phil says.
Timing is
many times. It's timing, and as you'll see in the series, there are these moments that you look at. What if Phil's father hadn't committed suicide when Phil was 9 years old? Would his family have moved to Los Angeles? What if Lana's father hadn't died in a mining accident when she was a young girl? Would her family have moved to Los Angeles? What if Lana hadn't broken her wrists? Would she have
dancing Irish dancing with a bunch of kids at a Christmas
with
party?
Little kids at a Christmas party?
Yeah.
Would she have had to take that job at the House of Blues? What if she had recognized him? You'll see in the series, she doesn't know who he is when he comes to the door right before closing time, and actually mistakes him for an old woman, and kind of spends the rest of the night trying to make up for that. Which is, if she hadn't done that, would she have agreed to have one more drink with him at the end of the night? It's all about timing, and Phil was a little obsessed with timing in his own life as well.
Yeah, and I think, one thing else that comes across too about her, which I was impressed, is that it's, she's not just not a victim. She's a very strong, resilient woman who's trying to do savvy, who's trying to do things the right way.
Right.
As you say, in the light of Me Too and all that that sort of stuff in terms of how she's trying to make her career and what she had to face, and her friends have talked. I mean, it's and like you said, bad accident, gets back up on her feet and says, "Okay, I'll work at the House of Blues, and try to make my way." So, and then as you say, had plans for the future. I mean, I think some of us who are old enough know even before this happened, there were these little stories, these snippets you'd hear about Spector and things, but he did have quite the euphemism used to be colorful history, but didn't he? I mean, what is, as it came out, and it came out in the trial, I mean, this was not being in some sort of situation like this, as he made it, we don't need to go into the details of the trial. You do prove, I think it's especially episodes 3 and 4, but he had this history of abuse and threatening people. I mean, he's quite, what about, there's that Leonard Cohen incident that I wasn't aware of, but maybe that's a good way of illustrating.
Well, I think one of the things, as whenever you get introduced to a story like this, it's like, what's your base level understanding of it? And for me, like, I knew a lot about Phil Spector as someone who's passionate about music and specific types of music and the Beatles, and so I knew a lot about Phil. And then you have to, and then you go through life and you hear stories here. Oh yeah, that guy's crazy. He held the Ramones at gunpoint at his house, and like he locked his wife in a basement and had a glass casket. And you start to hear all these stories, and before the internet, that stuff, legend. That stuff is like kind of urban legend, and it's just kind of passed on, and that's how things kind of frankly morph into, like, he pulled a gun to, like, he blew a guy's head off one time. You know what I mean? So things go a little crazy that way. But I think for us going into it, it was important to, like, almost like forget what we knew or what we thought we knew. It's like, let's look at this for real. Let's dispel rumors that, because Marky Ramone famously has said, he never pulled guns on us. That I don't know where that story came from. And so, you hear that and you're like, all right, well, maybe the other stuff isn't true. And then you talk to Darlene Love, and she's like, oh yeah, no, Phil came in the studio with a gun.
He had guns all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's that old SNL skit that we were talking about, the buckwheat one with,
right.
Was it, do you believe he killed buckwheat? Oh yeah, it's all you ever talked about.
That's all he ever talked about.
So
it's like, yes.
But I think that there is, we wanted to set the record straight. You have 4 hours to spend to really get to know and understand who these two people were, what went on in their lives that led them there. Let's get past the kind of salacious stuff and the big hair, which is, of course, everybody's like, oh, he with the afro. You're going to talk about that. It's like, yeah, we're going to talk about it, but we got 4 hours because it's like going to take like 2 minutes of the series.
Right.
So, we wanted to get in there and talk to people that had firsthand knowledge. And, we were speaking with Rob Fabroni, and he's a famous producer and was a friend of Lana's. Crazily, he had this connection with Phil Spector and Lana, but his connection with Phil was more, when he was a young kid, he kind of snuck into recording studios to see if he can learn, from, people that were working at the time. And, he sat in on a couple of Phil Spector sessions when he was young. But he told us this story, which is secondhand, which is pretty good, without getting it firsthand. But he was there, or he got the story directly from Leonard, who said that, Phil was, they were working in the studio together, and I think they were both in kind of a really, vulnerable spot. Both men had gone through divorces and dealing with their drinking and alcohol and drugs or whatever. So they were probably both not in the best frame of mind working together. But I think that's what attracted them to each other to begin working together anyway, because Leonard Cohen working with Phil Spector actually doesn't make any sense at all.
A wall of sound for Leonard Cohen.
And if you listen to that record, it doesn't make any sense, frankly. And I don't think the public bought it either. But, the story goes that, they were working all day and it was a long day and they were tracking. And then, Phil wanted Leonard to go in the booth and sing. And, Leonard, was like, yeah, you know what, Phil, let's do it tomorrow. I'm kind of beat tonight. And Phil insisted. And he's like, no, we'll just do it tomorrow. And then, Phil pulled a gun on him and said, go out there and, sing the fucking song. Yeah. And, and then, of course, the follow-up question is, why the hell did Leonard Cohen come back the next day if he got a gun pulled on him? And again, Rob says in the thing, I think, it was exciting. He never felt that he was really in danger. He was like, this guy's a little off and this could be an interesting dynamic. And as an artist, I guess you put yourself in that situation. It's like, all right, let's see where this crazy train goes, And I think, so that's that story, but that hadn't been really told before until we got it from Rob.
We also spoke to the lead detectives in the case who interviewed Leonard Cohen directly. And so they had firsthand knowledge from Leonard of the story, and he did corroborate it. Okay. So I know that some people have come out and said that never happened, and that Leonard said it never happened. But we know from the detectives that he did say it was true. To Don's point, he also said he never felt truly threatened, but he did in fact confirm that Phil Spector pulled a gun on him in the recording studio. He did it to John Lennon. He did it in a Darlene Love session. As you'll see in the trial, he did it to dozens of women over decades. So what is it about, particularly in the arts, this idea of the musical genius that mental illness gets dismissed as artistic greatness? And how do we get to the point where Lana Clarkson is dead in February of 2003? I think this industry in particular is littered with stories like this. You just look at Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein and frankly Kanye West these days. There's something about artistic geniuses that get a pass for their mental illness, but eventually the chickens come home to roost and bad things happen.
I would also say it's not just artistic genius; it's money. I mean, that's power. Well, Harvey Weinstein, I wouldn't say he's an artistic genius, but he's very powerful.
Yeah, but there's also lots of extremely wealthy surgeons that don't go in the operating room and pull a gun. I think there is something about the entertainment industry in particular that I don't know what it is that they get away with this kind of behavior. I think it is something about artists that are given a pass for crazy.
Given a and I was gonna say let's go to break, but I'm not. But I think in terms of artists, I mean, there's examples. I've lived in this country for over 20 years now, and there's some British artists that are maybe our U.S. audiences wouldn't know, but who were considered geniuses themselves. They weren't entertainers, but then the truth comes out, and horrible stories about abuse and things they've done to children and stuff. And it's like, and so there's I hear what you're saying. I completely agree. There's the money element. There's why these people give a pass, but then there's also this element. What is it about? And obviously we're not saying all artists, but there is a segment of an artistic community, mostly almost all male, that have these demons, and it's not an easy one. I imagine maybe that's something we can talk about when we come back from the break. What if you have any insights you think on what?
Listen, we all have demons. Women have demons too, but we certainly don't have the reputation that the men do about pulling guns on other people.
Right.
Yeah, but the tide's changing.
Well, here's hoping. Tom.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll be right back with Sheena Joyce and Don Argott, directors of the new Showtime and Sky Documentaries docu-series Spector.
You're listening to Factual America. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Alamo Pictures to keep up to date with new releases or upcoming shows. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program, our guests, and the team behind the production. Now back to Factual America.
Welcome back to Factual America. I'm here with Sheena M. Joyce and Don Argott, directors of the new Showtime and Sky Documentaries docu-series Spector, about the troubled musical genius Phil Spector and Lana Clarkson, who was more than aspiring actress in Hollywood. So we were talking about, I think maybe we kind of drew a line under that conversation about geniuses and male geniuses.
I did want to add, there was one thing that I wanted to add to that, which I think, when Sheena talks about doctors and lawyers and who might have their own demons, but they don't go into work and exhibit those demons or put it on display. But I think the arts are different in the sense that they're not adherent to any kind of strict rules about like when you show up for work and when, like as an artist, you're not clocking in, right? Yeah. So I think it takes people that can't really work within that system, the confines of that system, they gravitate towards being able to be loose and free. And then I think you get more eccentric behavior in general, whether it's legitimately people are off, like with a bipolar, with some kind of mental disorder, or they just don't think the way that everybody else thinks. And that's what we love about artists. And frankly, that's what we celebrate about artists, right? Is that, that sometimes the people that approach things are the innovators that bring things to that haven't been done before. And I think you put people like Phil Spector, you put the Beatles in that category. You put a lot of artists that have had monumental impact in the world. But as when you get into this stuff and when you get into it on a granular level, you start to see that we have done a poor job, I think, as a society, elevating these people and putting them on some kind of pedestal because they're always going to disappoint us, whether it's what happens in the case of Phil Spector, where, he's a convicted murderer, or in the case of Harvey Weinstein or Bill Cosby, where these, decades of sexual abuse and abuse in general have went unchecked. Those are the things that we have to figure out how to either separate so that as we talk about this now, and I think what the series opens up, it's like, how can you still listen to Phil Spector's music?
Can you separate the art from the artist?
Can you listen to Michael Jackson anymore? Can you watch Miramax movies anymore? Can you watch The Cosby Show anymore? Like everybody's
mind's different.
Is going to be different in that. But it does bring up this really complicated relationship that we have with people we don't know, but with things that are produced by these artists that means so much to us. I mean, people, when you're talking about Phil Spector's music, and I think one of the things that was interesting when we were talking to Alan Jackson, he's trying to select a jury. He's got to find people.
He was the lead prosecutor in the case.
Right. He's trying to find jury members that don't have "You've Lost That Loving Feeling" as their wedding song. That's a sense. I would hope
they didn't choose that song.
I'd be surprised.
Song to dance to.
I think I've been to that wedding.
The same wedding that they have "Every Breath You Take" as the wedding song. Weird stalker song.
Right. But the point being that Phil Spector's music was the soundtrack to people's lives.
Yes.
And there are lots of memories made to this beautiful music. And they had a hard time, the prosecution had a hard time finding jurors who were unaffected by music producer Phil Spector.
I mean, I was going to eventually ask you this question, but I think should ask it now since you've already sort of raised it. I mean, you pose this to some of the subjects in the film. I mean, how are we to remember Spector, and how do you think we should remember him? And as for you as filmmakers, how would you answer your own question on that?
Well, there's an interesting idea about legacy too, right? It's not just how you remember someone. Certainly when Phil died, there was a lot of criticism in the UK about how he was remembered, in the headlines. And I remember the apology had to be made because of how he was identified when he first died in the press. Personally, I am conflicted as I am about a lot of these, musical and artistic geniuses. I can't listen to Michael Jackson music anymore, but I still listen to Kanye West music. It hasn't crossed that line for me yet. I think it's easier for people to listen to the music of Phil Spector because Phil was the producer and behind the scenes, and there's a layer removed there where you're hearing his work, but you're not necessarily hearing him. I don't know what Christmas would be without Phil Spector's Christmas album. We just got through the holiday season, and
Right.
that music is everywhere. It's a very personal decision, and it's a very individual line. And the series isn't going to end with a neat answer. And I don't have a very clean answer for that. It's just, it's a feeling you get, and everyone's line is going to be different, I think.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that, as filmmakers, specifically doing documentaries, I mean, I think one of the success of this series for us was being able to show both sides. A lot of times, documentaries get criticized for being, too one-sided, or that they're trying to make a case, or for one
They have
side,
an agenda,
or have some kind of agenda. And I think most documentary filmmakers, always try to get everybody to talk, right? Because it doesn't help when you're just telling a one-sided thing. The problem is, it usually becomes difficult when, let's talk about, if it's a film about pollution, obviously you have, the environmentalists, and you want the polluters too, right? But the polluters don't look at it as they have anything to gain by going on camera and saying their position. So it then in turn becomes this very one-sided, documentary in the sense. But for us, we wanted it. We certainly came into it with the angle of wanting to really flesh out Lana Clarkson as a full-fledged human being and kind of give her dignity back. That was something that was important to us in the series. But to be able to talk to the prosecution and the defense, to be able to speak to the Spector side and the Clarkson side, it really does. It's I think you pointed it out earlier. It's like that when you talked about bringing Lana, bringing the victim to life and these types of things, and everybody says they try to do it. I think what we did is that, but I also think people aren't necessarily used to seeing both sides represented and then having to draw their own conclusion. I think so much that's happening in documentary right now, maybe because it is one-sided and they don't have the other side, or that the filmmakers came in to specifically drill down on a point that they wanted to make. But for us, it's more interesting and complex when you get to watch a trial, hear from both sides, and then literally make up your own mind. Yeah. There are people that have come up to us and say, I think Phil's innocent. Okay, cool.
There have also been people that criticized us for contextualizing Phil's behavior as if that's somehow giving him a pass. I think it was important to us to present him as a multifaceted human being. He was a loving and devoted father to his daughter Nicole. He was not to his other children. It doesn't negate the fact that he murdered Lana Clarkson. Yeah. Yet he was a loving and devoted father to his daughter Nicole. Yeah. So, it's funny that we get criticized for things like that, but people are complex and can be more than one thing to many people, and we strove to show that through the series.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very good point in that, as you say, you want to present Lana Clarkson in a fully fledged view, and I completely agree. You've got everyone there. You got the defense attorneys, you've got the prosecutors, you got the investigators, you've got Nicole, his daughter, on there. Which I will say, there's been some poor journalism, but I saw a headline here that basically made it sound like this film was trying to show that Spector was innocent. It's not what you're doing.
Not so much.
That's not what you're doing at all. Spoiler alert, but
yeah.
But the thing that comes out, and it really, I don't know, maybe didn't really hit me towards the end, but it's like Spector's story also hasn't been fully told either. Yes. And okay, you're not. Yeah, I can see where some people might try to say you're giving him a bit of a pass, but you're not excusing mental illness as a reason for why this happened. But it is true that he had mental illness, right?
Exactly.
And as you say, this timing issue, it's about the father's suicide. We had R.J. Cutler on here one time about Belushi, and he was saying, to know some philosopher or writer, he was saying, it said, to know the man, look at daddy. And I think there's a lot of there's that element to it.
Yeah.
So I mean, is that
it's nice to blame the father instead of the mother.
Well,
as a mom, I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, our dad's
it's usually blame the mom.
Well, as a dad, because we just kind of stand back and I didn't, that's me personally. Obviously, I'm not only denigrating myself, but why? I mean, is that part? I mean, why make this film now? I mean, how did this project get started? Because it's a story that's been covered extensively in a way. It's not an unknown crime. For those who are living through it, it was you couldn't get away from it in the U.S. certainly in terms of media coverage, even if it was just to talk about Spector's hair. But why make this now? How did this come about?
Well, we were talking with Lightbox, Jonathan and Simon Chin about another project, a music related project that unfortunately never took off, but we hit it off and had really good conversations while we were talking about this other project. And then it was kind of like, I guess it was right before the pandemic.
It was before the pandemic, and they brought this up, and
they're saying, do you have any interest in Phil Spector, a docu-series? Or like, wow, that's actually an interesting idea.
With James Marsh.
Who's coming on to EP. With Jonathan and Simon. And, for us, we have to ask ourselves the same question. Why now?
And why him?
And why him? And what can we bring to the table that hasn't already been brought to the table? We're not interested in rehashing, another Phil Spector doc just to make it current and say the same things and really not, get anywhere interesting. So as we start to dig in and as we start to look at and do research, at that time, Phil was actually still alive. He was in prison. And there was discussions about, hey, is this a film where we try to get, Phil in the jailhouse interview, for where he's at to reflect, is that what this is? And we kind of kicked that around a little bit, and you can't hinge a project on that level of unknown. Yes, A, would he do it? And B, would the prison even allow it? So like that seemed like that was something that we could hinge a narrative on. But as we started to look through the research specifically, I knew a lot about his musical career, but not as much about the trial. Obviously, we lived through it, but it's 2020, 2019, 2003. It's kind of like in a lot of people's recent memory, which is a positive. Which also means there's a lot of footage and that kind of stuff. So from a documentary archival standpoint, that's a positive. But it was really looking into the trial and seeing B-movie actress Lana Clarkson, over the hill, past her prime, desperate,
wrong side of 40.
As we started to dig in, we're like, nobody knows this story. And I think, there is an interesting story to now look back with, the events of Me Too and re-examining, behavior that was not that long ago through that lens. And so we felt that like the Lana Clarkson's part of it was significant and different enough that we could still retell the Phil history story, but in a way that would resonate a little bit more. I think we leaned into
not just retell, but maybe uncover some new information, maybe contextualize his behavior in light of the events in January, or I keep saying January, in February, because we're in January now, February 3rd, 2003. But what happened in each of these individuals' lives, that they were on these seemingly parallel tracks that then caused them to intersect that night at the House of Blues? How did they get there? How did we as a society get there? And what has happened since? So timing wise, it felt like the right time to re-examine the life and legacy of Phil Spector and to reintroduce Lana Clarkson as a real person to audiences.
And I also think what happens here, like making docs, there's a big discovery process, and the discovery process actually doesn't stop until you're done shooting, and then it still can keep going with a new piece of archival, whether it's audio or video, that might reshape or reframe something. But early on, we were able to, acquire these cassette tapes from Mick Brown, who I feel like once there was that Telegraph article that really became almost the impetus for Phil to kind of be.
Talk about timing.
Talk about timing. And this is a guy who's a recluse for 20 plus years, and Mick and the editor at the Telegraph decide like, hey, whatever happened to that crazy music producer Phil Spector? Right. And then literally 6 weeks after that interview, the death of Lana Clarkson. So we felt like that was really interesting to be able to kind of come in with that, with that kind of like present day component almost of, this guy who has the last Phil Spector interview, had the cassette tapes, listening to those tapes. It's extraordinary. Like he's clearly vulnerable. He's clearly like being, very candid and very honest. And, and then obviously the events that transpire, and then that bring Mick, the journalist, into it almost as like, wait, did I cause this by writing this article? And, speaking to Vikram later, he, again, this is not.
Who's a documentary filmmaker who shot with Phil during the trial. Right.
Which we were able to like interview him, use some of his footage, but, to Vikram's take on it, which again, cannot be 100%, confirmed or but his idea that Phil read this article and in Mick's mind that he flipped out and like killed his wife or his assistant at the time, that wasn't the case. But what that article maybe did do was made him go out that night on a bender and made him go out and like try to like suppress shit or like whatever that was going on, because he didn't go out a lot. So it's all like we keep going back to this theme of timing and the what ifs. And there's so many in this story that were really kind of remarkable, that a lot of times you work really hard as a storyteller to connect all these dots, but they were all there.
They were all there.
The dots were already there.
They were all there. And I do want to just add one more thing about how lucky we were to get some amazing archival. Mick Brown's audio tapes, so we hear Phil Spector's voice.
Amazing.
We had incredible access to both the Spector side and the Clarkson side, the prosecution and the defense, the lead detectives. We were able to get an audio tape that a uniformed officer, the night of the murder at the scene, put a little recorder on the banister of the staircase and was able to record Phil as he was talking to the officers who were trying to figure out what was going on, and then eventually arresting him and bringing him in for questioning. So you hear Phil's voice the night of the murder. We had incredible archival, and so even though Phil has since passed, he's very present in this film, and you get to see him and hear his voice and hear from him directly.
I think we always talk about never before seen, but definitely never before heard.
Certainly.
It certainly applies. And I think, is that true with, just as you noted, I was wondering, because maybe I missed it, but I don't know if he explicitly says it, but does Mick Brown, did he really think he caused his article?
Mick Brown really did think he caused Lana Clarkson's murder. He had interviewed Phil for the Telegraph 6 weeks prior, had promised Phil that he would send along an advance copy of the article. It happened to his understanding, arrive at Phil's house the morning of the murder. So when he went into the Telegraph offices the next day, February 4th, someone said to him, "What did you do to Phil Spector?" And he's like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Well, he like killed his assistant or something. I don't know." So for the longest time, Mick did feel responsible. He found out later that that the FedEx was unopened. So he doesn't now believe that he kind of triggered that, but Vikram, it's his understanding that Phil was faxed a copy of the article. And so even though he hadn't opened that FedEx and seen the physical copy of the Telegraph magazine, that he did get to read the story and see the headline, and that did prompt him to go on a bender. Phil has these moments in his life, long stretches where he had been diagnosed as being bipolar, and he was really good about taking his medication, but you can't mix the meds with alcohol, and so he would have these stretches of lucidity, and then something would happen and he would either go off his meds or combine it with alcohol, and trouble would ensue. And the night of Lana's death, he went on a super hardcore drinking bender throughout Hollywood that ended the night at the House of Blues where he, met Lana Clarkson. So I don't know if Phil actually got to read the article and if that was the inciting incident for that night or not. Phil, as he told Mick, had his demons.
Yeah. And then, to maybe on that note too, as no one person can point the finger back at themselves for the blame. I mean, there's so much, as your documentary points out, and it gets back to that Spector thing about timing again.
Yes,
but
exactly.
Did that actually air, that interview with him?
Yeah, that film, it's called The Agony and the Ecstasy of Phil Spector.
Okay.
It was on, I think it was on BBC.
It was BBC, but yeah, I wasn't sure. I couldn't remember.
Yeah. It's a he was able to speak to Phil, and had a lot more planned to shoot, but I think he only got those 2 interviews. So he basically had to work with those 2 interviews and kind of the courtroom stuff to piece his thing together.
During the trial.
Yes, that's right. It was, exactly. I was about to say something. I'm going to stop it there, but there is all the people we've mentioned, we've talked about some stories here that are shared in the film, but there's more that we haven't even touched on that I think are. Yeah, there's a lot more. Hence why it's four episodes. Right. But even you talk about secondhand and Leonard Cohen. Rob had a firsthand experience, which I thought was quite an interesting story about recording in the studio with Phil Spector.
That's right, and we tried very, very, very hard to get firsthand accounts of both Phil Spector and Lana Clarkson. So we tried to cut to the truth as closely as we possibly could, which is challenging when the main subject has passed away. Main subjects are no longer with us. Yeah, definitely. But nonetheless, we tried very hard to hear directly from the people who knew those subjects best.
And yes, that exactly. And Vikram has a similar story, which I think definitely worth. I thought was quite chilling.
There's
these kind of stories.
Theme in Phil's life about control and power and not wanting to be left alone. And there are women and men throughout Phil's life that have stories about Phil not wanting them to go home. Yeah.
Well, I've got to. Speaking of home, I've got to let you two go here pretty quickly because you've got to, I think, pick up your daughter from school.
Yeah, we have a kid we have to get from school.
Yeah, so you're longtime collaborators in life and film. What's next for you two after this?
We've had a pretty busy couple of years. We have a lot of films that have and series that have come out. We did this Spector series. We did a 4-part documentary series for Discovery Plus called The Bond, which was executive produced by Team Downey, Robert Downey Jr. and Susan Downey. That's on Discovery Plus. That came out earlier this year. I have a Ronnie James Dio documentary that just came out.
Oh my God! Sorry, I haven't heard.
What's crazy is it's
I haven't heard that name.
Incredible amount of work.
Wait, are you a Dio fan?
No, I can't say I'm a Dio fan, but I'm from San Antonio, which is like one of the heavy metal capitals of the U.S. And Ronnie James Dio was on the radio all the time.
Oh my God, you have to see this movie. I'll send you a link.
Yeah.
Okay, please do. Oh my goodness, it's
the definitive Dio documentary.
It came out. We did a small theatrical run. the tail in the beginning of fall. It's currently on Showtime, and then it's going to be on.
Oh, it was released in the UK too.
It was?
I thought so. Maybe I'm mistaken.
I don't think it has been yet, but yeah, we're working on it. So that is happening, and we have a 4-part documentary series is coming out in probably the spring on AMC. And yeah, we got the next couple things that we're trying to get off the ground and get going.
We keep busy.
We just keep our heads down and keep cranking out shit.
Well, I wouldn't call it
good shit.
Good shit.
It's good shit. Yeah, exactly.
Thanks.
We need to qualify that. Well,
yes, thank you.
Well, Sheena and Don, it's been a pleasure to have you on Factual America. I've really enjoyed it. It's been I think we even tried to get you on previously for some, like the Vonnegut one and some of the others. So, but I'm glad we finally got you on. So just to remind our listeners and viewers, we've been talking with Sheena Joyce and Don Argott, the directors of the new Showtime and Sky Documentaries docu-series Spector. Do check it out. I also would like to thank those who helped make this podcast possible. A big shout out to Sam and Joe at Inner Sound Audio in York, England. Big thanks to Amy Ord, our podcast manager at Alamo Pictures, who ensures we continue getting great guests onto the show and that everything otherwise runs smoothly. Finally, a big thanks to our listeners. Many of you have been with us for 4 incredible seasons. Please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas, whether it is on YouTube, social media, or directly by email. Please also remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off.
You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, specializing in documentaries, television, and shorts about the USA for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Alamo Pictures. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is alamopictures.co.uk.